Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Looks like we're getting a good crowd walking in here. If you're here for cybersecurity, you're in the right place. If you're not, I don't know where you should be, but join us anyway. I got some announcements they want me to make here. First off, room lighting and temperature seems to be good. I'm supposed to smile a lot. Okay. Introduce myself. I'll do that in a minute. I don't have any co-presenters in this. We will have a panel later on that's on your agenda as well. Questions, we'll kind of give you plenty of time at the end to ask your questions. Please come to the mics because this is being recorded to share after the conference with folks that couldn't get here. You will be getting an evaluation emailed to you. We appreciate the feedback. It helps us make these better. As a matter of fact, feedback from last year is why we have the second presentation today on what I call the black hole. And we'll get into that on the later session number 26. And if you have questions, I'll be around till the end of our time if we get done a little bit early. Otherwise, I'm here all week. Try to find me. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. We also have an email address at the end of the slide presentation. Send the questions there. The team will help answer those or give them to me as appropriate. So that's it. And they told me I have to start on time, finish on time, so we'll try to do that as well. But give you plenty of time to ask questions because I think questions generate a lot of things. So who am I? Well, I'm Dan Commons. I am the Federal Student Aid Chief Information Security Officer. What does that mean besides a title? It means that I interface with you on all cybersecurity issues. The reports you guys send in come to my office eventually, and we'll talk about the process a little bit. And we try to help solve those problems. We try to give you advice, best practices, whatever we can do to help you better yourself in the cybersecurity arena. It's kind of what I'm the focal point for. I have a team supporting me both on specifically dedicated to schools. I have, unfortunately, he missed his airplane, one individual on the government side and a couple contractors that answer that mailbox all the time. And then I have a full cyber team that's the department team, interface with the department team, making sure that we have everything covered end to end from both the department perspective and the FSA specific perspective. So that's kind of where I live right now. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the problem. We're going to talk a little bit about the landscape, introduce a new concept that the department's Chief Information Security Officer has been advocating called the boom. We're going to talk about a little bit of a partnership. What is a breach? Some of the processes associated that we do in a response to a breach. Some case studies I think you'll find kind of interesting. Best practices. We have a compliance component of this as well. And then we'll talk about reporting, resources, and then give you an opportunity to ask questions as we go out forward. So we see every day a lot of headlines. We see headlines like this that talk about commercial entities. We see them for state governments. We see them for city governments. We see them for schools. What scares me the most is that one right in the middle, Capital One data breach. That can happen to any of us at any time. So we pay attention to what's going on in the world around us, trying to understand how it might impact both the schools, the school activities, and specifically what we're really concerned with from my perspective, my seat, is the data. The information we provide to you that you need to do for your business, how are we making sure that data is protected? You know, you heard this morning from the Secretary, $1.5 trillion and 42 million, I guess was the number she gave this morning, students that we need to be concerned with their privacy data and then concerned with things like fraud associated with the dollars as well. And we're not seeing these numbers, not seeing these incidents go down, just up. So it's a global problem. We're not the only ones having it. You can see this around the world from entities. This was just a very microsecond snapshot of a particular website that company does this for a living, and these are their customers' attacks that they're seeing, and that is, again, just a microsecond. So here's where the real concern is the evolving threat landscape. If you go back in time, some of us were back in the business in that time frame, we didn't see a lot of this problem space. Didn't have computers, didn't have mobile devices like we have today. That proliferation of data and capabilities and interaction and information flow and social media and all of those factors. But as you see early on, network attacks were pretty common. You could see some hacking. Hackers became the popular nomenclature back in the 90s into the 2000s. Then they started looking at web attacks. Big thing was identity theft. How do we get information we can do something with, potentially make a profit on? Then we talked about data breaches, which is also tied into identity theft a little bit. Now as we get into 2010, into current times, approaching 2020, we see things like cybercrime is huge. Hacktivists, they have an agenda of some type, and that's why they're going after particular targets. You saw the city of Baltimore this last year had a major ransomware event that basically took the city down. And the last number I heard, as a matter of fact, earlier today, was roughly $20 million worth of damage to the city that they won't recover from in trying to get back information that was locked up and withheld from them. And we're going to see it increase as we see technology increase. We see the proliferation of mobile devices. That's a big focus for us as well. You heard General Brown this morning talk about going mobile, transparency. You're going from your cell phone to your tablet to your PC, and how do we make all that work together? And from my perspective, how do we protect all of that? How do we make sure we get you the right access and try to address some of these potential threats against that access, that threats against that information? How do we protect you? It's a big worry for us every day. So here's some specific threats that are targeting you guys, the education sector. Direct deposit information to redirect financial aid, reimbursements to attacker bank accounts. Sounds like science fiction. It happened. We saw that happen this summer. So that's happening every day. Target student PII for resale on the black market. Okay, PII is valuable, identity theft. They sell it for literally pennies. You can buy it in bulk, but it's the information that impacts all of us. And if anyone's experienced identity theft, you know what a problem it is to recover from that identity theft. So we try to prevent it up front if we possibly can. Encryption school systems for ransom, again, a major issue. I mentioned Baltimore. We see this happening in schools as well. That one person clicked on that one email that happened to have a link that brought them down a particular attack that then locked up their network, and now we have to figure out how to recover from it. And in some cases, the school wasn't prepared for losing all of their computers or a large number of their computers and didn't have good backup practices that were consistent. So they had to figure out how to recover that data. And in some cases, they never recovered the data. So it's very important we keep that in mind. And ransomware, again, is a big attack vector for us right now. And the final one is research and intellectual property. While I haven't dealt with a lot of that, we're probably primarily focused on the FSA data we give to you. We are getting more and more into that. Our IG is very active in that space, as well as some other organizations that we are connected with as far as DHS. So that is, though, a factor we need to talk about when we talk about how you're securing your schools, particularly when we talk about your IT and your CIOs and those kind of folks. But again, just remember, it is something you're going to see or potentially see if your school is involved in that kind of information. Some additional threats. I talked about ransomware a little bit. We're seeing it increase every day. We do, in the department, we do multiple tests every year on ransomware. We catch a lot of our own folks that aren't doing the proper health and hygiene activities. But we're trying to educate everybody. And education is a large part of preventing ransomware as you go forward. If people know what to look for and what not to do, then more than likely your attack space reduces, and therefore you won't get folks to do the improper thing, and you end up losing your computer because they did something on the web or with an email that created a problem for you. The next one, sophisticated credential theft attacks. We're not quite into that space as much as I want to be. We are seeing some of that. Some of that's a little more long-term type attacks. We're trying to figure out how to understand them in a school environment. We understand it in our environment because it's some of the stuff we plan for. But when you've got everything from a small barber school, I won't use the person's name, I've used it in the past and I know the person, but a small barber school that's got 5 or 6 computers to the largest universities. Each situation is going to be unique, and I'm sure you can look across your particular school or institution and see examples where you either don't have a lot of capability in the IT area, you may not have resources to support it, you may not have a large IT team that could help you out. You probably don't have, and it's a pretty good statement I can make, you probably don't have a lot of cybersecurity expertise on your IT team. I've talked to a lot of schools over the last year, and as part of our outreach program, and they're saying, I've got an IT shop, but they're not cyber people. They don't understand this space. They understand how to stand up a network. They understand that they're supposed to be doing some things, but they're just not sure what they're supposed to do. So again, that's a shortfall that we need to be working on as we go forward. And these credential theft type attacks are one of those that really get a little more expertise involvement and necessary. And then the big thing we're pushing for, department's pushing for as well, is we're going to the cloud. How do we manage the cloud? How do we make sure stuff in the cloud is secure? And depending on what cloud you go to, each one is unique in the way they secure the information and the way they allow access. So cloud security is becoming more and more important. What we are finding or seeing is clouds being used that there is no effort to secure that cloud. And that's what we want to kind of get at and provide some additional best practices that we modeled after what we're learning. Because again, as you heard this morning, next gen is a huge push. Next gen is really cloud. Most of the capabilities for the next gen platforms, as we see them coming out over the next year, are going to be cloud-based. So we're going to see a lot of cloud. We're learning a lot from the cloud environment as well that we'll be able to create best practices and pass on as we go forward. We talked about the boom, a new concept. Restating a concept, I think, is more appropriate. So the boom is when you get compromised. What do you do? What happens? What we want to get after is what can we do left and right of the boom. Left is proactive. It usually costs you some dollars to be proactive. But as Baltimore found out, it cost a lot more dollars to be reactive. Okay, they could have prevented some stuff if they'd been proactive. So we talk about making sure you have the right technical capabilities. Do you do your backups? Are they consistent? Are you able to recover? Do you test them? Things that you need to do to make sure that the data that you need to do your job with every single day is available to you. It takes planning. It really takes a lot of training as well. And training for the individuals that are involved with it, training for the staff associated with protecting the data, and then training for us as well to make sure that we understand your environments as well. So we're looking at some opportunities we may be able to put together this year. You saw training was big with General Brown this morning. We're looking at how we can add some training associated with cyber into that training package that we're starting to offer to everybody as we go forward. And then finally, I mentioned a little bit earlier, is staffing. Make sure we have the right people. Again, cybersecurity expertise is not an easy asset to get a hold of and keep. And so it's important that you have some staffing available to be able to answer to that. Then you get the boom, thing none of us want to see. And then you go right to the boom. Again, it takes a lot more money because you have to recover. Can you even recover is one of the issues, technically. Can you recover, regenerate that equipment? Does it require you to go out and purchase new equipment, okay, to replace what was compromised? Financial recovery. What's it going to cost your school to do it? Insurance. Do you have insurance that will help you compensate for some of that? That's one of the ways that the city of Baltimore approached it was after the fact here, they've gone out and made a major purchase of a financial insurance to make sure that if it happens in the future, they can have some compensation and not all of it out of pocket. But you need to understand the financial recovery, and as important is what's the impact to your students? Because that's their data that's been compromised or ransomware or whatever the case may be, whatever the boom was. What's the impact of that student? Will they get their financial aid as they planned on? Do you have to do something to compensate for the fact they don't get the financial aid that everyone thought they were going to get because a compromise occurred? Okay? So that's a factor we have to think about. Can they continue to file things like FAFSA? That's our job to make sure that that's available and it doesn't get compromised. But it could compromise their endpoint. For example, their mobile device, and that's another factor. Maybe their mobile device gets compromised. Do they lose their data on that? Do they understand the impact of that? If you talk to a lot of folks nowadays, a lot of millennials, I guess we'll use that term, they live and die off that phone. I'm probably not the only one that has one or two of these real close to it. Okay? You live off of this. You have passwords on this. You have your life's information, your personal data, your social environments. Do they understand how to secure this from a student perspective? Okay, do they have passwords that are good and hard, difficult to crack? Do they use the biometrics? How do they secure that and protect it? That's very important as well. And then your reputation. You're on your local newspaper's front page. The next thing you know, you're on the Wall Street Journal front page or the Washington Times. You don't want to be there. We've had schools this year that made the front page. Luckily, in one instance, they made the front page of their primary state paper. That was like 4 weeks after we started they reported it to us. We were already working, we were almost done before it ever made the newspaper. So that was a win for us. We were way ahead of the process there. What's scary, though, is when the newspaper breaks it and you don't even know about it yet. Or you just found out about it and they broke it. Now you get a lot of attention that you don't want, not only from your particular community aspect, your school, your state, whatever the case may be. Now you got folks like me going, what happened? What was compromised? Do you know what was compromised? Sometimes that's difficult to find out as well. And then what's that do to your reputation as you go forward? Because a major compromise for a school will keep coming up over and over and over in statistics and metrics as you go forward for years. You'll see that kind of information. So it's very important. So want to be left of the boom. Want to handle the boom as quickly as possible. Minimize the right of the boom. The financial impact, the impact to the individuals to the right of the boom. So keep in mind, we want to be to the left. So how do we do this? So we partner with you guys. And we kind of use this model to help us walk through things that are happening, particularly as we get into that boom environment. We talk about identify. Well, there's a lot of cybersecurity guidance to keep you to the left of the boom, to be proactive. We publish a little bit in our facts and FAQs, best practices, et cetera. Department supports us on that as well. But we also see national standards, for example, that are published out there that help guide folks to do some of the right things that you need to be doing to protect that information. Again, my concern is, are we protecting that information that we give you? Your concern is you've got to protect it for yourselves. So identify, talks about how do we recognize the problem, like how do we know ransomware is occurring? How do we know that that student's financial bank information was changed and they're no longer getting their check? Is it when they walk in and say, hey, I haven't gotten paid and I expected to get some money, and you go, well, we sent it to your bank account, and you look in the computer and the bank account's a different bank account than they have. Okay, it got switched. So those are things you want to take and identify. Once you do that, protect it, safeguard guidance, some of the information I talked about. The detection itself is that incident report, that intake, and the investigation that goes after. When I say investigation, that's not necessarily an investigation by a law enforcement organization, for example. That's just how we look at things, how we analyze what the problem was in order to understand what we need to do to fix the problem. So that's really looking at it, investigating what's going on, understanding what's going on so we can be able to turn around and help fix the problem. And that's the important piece, fix the problem, take care of the students. Then we go into respond. That's that containment, assistance, do that root cause analysis. It may require us to come out and visit with you. We've done that in the past. It may be something we can do from our location to help out your technical teams, to help out you guys to get through what's happening to that student. Then it's recovery. How are you going to fix that problem long term? How are you going to make sure that that problem doesn't happen again in the future? And that's very important, so to fill those gaps, to stop the bleed and make sure the bleed doesn't happen again. So we're going to talk about breach real quick. Last year, except the slide wants to go back to boom. So last year we talked about breach. And when I gave you a definition of breach, it was basically what we go by in the department. We're mandated by federal regulations to go by the Office of Management and Budget's definition. That has been kind of contentious with the the educational environment and some of the organizations that you support you guys, like EDUCAUSE, ACE, NAFU, some of the other ones that support you. This year, we've taken it to heart under our Deputy Secretary, who happens to be with us today, and under the Department CIO, we actually have engaged most of those organizations, many meetings with them to talk about not just breach, but talk about how we can get better at supporting you at the school level. What is it we need to do to help you stop cybersecurity incidents from happening? Left of the boom, what are we going to do when the boom happens? And then right of the boom. So we've had a lot of those conversations, very productive conversations. We're still having those conversations continuing. We're putting together language that will help solidify those conversations. And that's an ongoing process for us. So I would expect as we evolve this a little bit more over the next few months, we'll have a better foundation to be able to give you some additional guidance. And those organizations that support you will also be part of the stakeholders of that guidance, so they understand what it is that we're asking from a department perspective for you guys to be able to do. So we're using the definition because that's what we have to go by. I'm saying it may change as it evolves. I don't think it'll change a lot because this hits some of the key high points that we have to go by as well. So really it's a loss of control, compromise, unauthorized disclosure, unauthorized acquisition, or similar occurrence where a person other than the authorized user accesses or potentially accesses personal information, or an authorized user accesses or potentially accesses personal information for other than the authorized purpose. So reality, unauthorized access. I get access to your stuff and I'm not supposed to. Okay, that's the bottom line for a breach. Someone has it that shouldn't have it. The data set that we're specifically focused on, and I talk about the FSA data information, it's what you get under the Title IV program. That's defined in your participation agreements. We are looking very hard at all of the agreements with you to make sure that they're clear, consistent in the cyber area, and that if we need to have additional guidance, we're looking at how to put those into those documents to make sure you understand the requirements. Expectations. We need to set your expectations as well. So that ongoing discussion is how we're trying to do that. And I think if we can get all those groups on board to understand where we're going to go and we come up with a common language and common vernacular, then I think it's going to be very easy for you to be able to execute to that information. So one of the things that we have been out of last year's conference and that set up the meeting later on, I won't steal all the thunder for the later one, is what happens? I reported it. I found a problem. What really happens after that point? So this is kind of real quick how we run through internally the process. This is a combined team of federal student aid, incident response personnel under the FSA Security Operations Center and the department's Security Operations Center. It's a combined team that responds to these. One of them will get it, share it with the other one, make sure that we're on the same sheet of music, and then we'll start running through additional processes. So you get the report, we analyze it, we classify it. By classify, it's based on your report to us, we will put it in a bin. And that particular bin will be a category. It'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 4 being the ones that are the most impact. Either it's a large dollar value, a large PII, we have a lot of public scrutiny on it already, those type of things. So we'll categorize it just to help prioritize and understand the resources we're going to throw at it. And I will guarantee you anything above a 2, we're throwing as much resources as we have available at it to get it solved as quickly as possible. But once it gets notified to us and we get the information, then the PSI team under me reaches out to whoever reported it, and we're trying to talk to the IT people to get a technical understanding of what happened so that we can provide you with advice and guidance. So that team will work out to you to triage it, respond to it, monitor it after it's responded to provide whatever advice we are able to advise you at that particular time. So that's step 2. Step 3, we'll continue to give recommendations. We'll make sure the remediation is complete, problems fixed. We'll get those lessons learned, and we have gathered a lot of them over this last year. We'll analyze trends, and then we'll be able to watch those trends across what was a relatively small number of schools. Is that trend showing up other places? And can we provide that information to you guys as well? And then we'll share that best practice in step 5. One interesting thing that we did this year, for the first time in August, we went out on open source research. We didn't touch any school, and found all the information we could related to web vulnerabilities. And a surprising amount of information we came forward with. We hit 650,000 school websites, of which a vast majority of them were non-secure. In other words, you go to your bank and you get the little padlock symbol, you're on a secure website. We saw a whole bunch of them that weren't. We also saw some problems with the secured sites, like you weren't using the proper method to secure it. It's an easily, I will say, attacked or broken method. So we looked at the numbers and did all of our crunching. There were 5 top ones that came out. If we could close those 5 across all 6,500 schools we looked at, 88% of your attack surface would disappear. That's the information we want to get out to you guys. How vulnerable are you from an open source view? We didn't look at your school, we didn't scan your school, we didn't touch your school. We just went out and saw what was available on the internet from everyone else that's doing that to you, and then consolidated it. So that's the type of information we're looking at not only how can we do to understand it, but how then can we meet with your particular school and say, hey, if you do these 3 things, you're going to be this much more secure, and your risk is going to go down. Okay, and how do you do them? So we're looking very hard at that as part of this whole best practices opportunity. So some of the breach causes that we've seen this last year, mishandling of data, a lot of that's been very small. By small, I say 1,000 or less. I sent a spreadsheet out, okay, and I sent it to the wrong person. So a professor had a spreadsheet of student information that contained PII. They sent it to another professor who didn't have a need to know that information, or they accidentally sent it to a student. They thought it was something else, or whatever the case. So we see mishandling of data. Phishing attacks. Phishing is a big vulnerability in that a lot of ransomware is delivered via phishing. You know, hey, your bank information has changed. Please click on the link so we can help fix your problem. Okay, it's to students. It might be something like, your student loan information is now available. Please click on the link. It will take you to the website to be able to help you get that information so you know how much money you got. Well, they'll click on the link. Next thing they know, then they're a target of phishing, either for their credentials so they can get access to the system. You know, it goes to a sign-in page. It looks a lot like they're used to signing in, and has a username and password. They diligently type username and password in, and then it redirects them back to the real page, but they've got their credentials. They know who they are. So they can log in and change the financial data, for example, to change the routing number. And maybe they'll change the routing number just by adding a second routing number, leave the first one alone for a while. I got your username and password. I can come back at any time. And then come back later on and change it, and then you still won't know about it. So Phishing is a big way to get in. Phishing is a big way then also with the ransomware. The actual IT system misconfiguration, when I talked about the websites, 650,000 of them, a lot of that's configuration. How do you set it up? Do you do it properly, and do you do it in a secure manner? So that's basic IT health and hygiene. How are they doing their business? And password recycling, I use the same password on Facebook, Instagram, my bank, my school, on and on and on and on. So if I'm using the same password, if I get the password one time, I'm going to try it on all your accounts to see if I can get in. And surprising how easy it is to get in. Understand everyone has lots of passwords. You get in the federal government, you got a password for every site, and they are very long and complex, and it's very tempting to make them the same at every site. But again, password recycling, very bad practice. Breach trends, related to the left side there, 11% of what we saw was misuse. 27% was the malware. 25% was that social phishing, trying to get their information. 23% was hacking, and then 14% was misconfiguration. You can see just by doing basic IT health and hygiene, you drop 14% right off of that chart. If you train everybody on phishing and you do phishing exercises, you can lower that number significantly. We have seen the trend in the department for what we're doing internal to our own employees and contractors. The trend has been better event by event, typically. You're going to have some very successful phishing, I will tell you right now, on your tests. But in general, we are seeing the trend becoming positive, not negative. So we're getting better. Our health and hygiene and phishing is getting better. But again, that's because we're doing it a lot. We're seeing it a lot. We're training people on how to do the right thing. And that's part of the educational piece of it. I've said ransomware quite a bit. You see a lot of targeted ransomware. So I want to send something to specific people because I think they have access to more stuff. Okay, look at each other. Aren't you the folks I want to target? I want to send you a piece of ransomware because I know you're in the financial institution doing financial business with students. You have student information at your fingertips. I want to target you. You're going to be rich for me. I'm going to get a lot of student information out of you. Okay? Either that or I'm going to lock you up so you get tied up in trying to fix the problem. And one of those other things I did, I got the username and password off the phishing. I changed the bank account while you're locked up with ransomware. You're not going to get alerts or alarms if you have them set up. Okay? I'm going to be able to then go in and do that. You won't ever know about it because I took you down with ransomware. So it's a continual threat, targeted to individuals. I will tell you, I get targeted phishing email. The department's mechanisms typically stop it at the gateway, so I never actually see it. A lot of it's quarantine. I look at my quarantine list, and I'm going, no. I don't even want to mess with that email at all. Leave it in quarantine, because that's what the tools are supposed to do. So again, using technology to our best advantage from a cyber perspective. It'll attack your PC on your desk. It's going to go after your servers. It's going to try to take out your backups. If you've done good backup practices, you're fine. You can restore from backups typically. But if you've had them on the same computer, for example, your backup's all right there together, well, guess what? It's going to be gone as well. So keep that in mind. Again, it's a growing problem. A lot of targeted organizations, and we see it as a big attack vector as we go into 2020 and 2021. So some of this I've talked about already. This particular example is a ransomware attack called RYAC, just so you have the name if you're interested in looking it up. Basically encrypted all the IT infrastructure for the school. Crippled them. I couldn't do records. I couldn't do grades. I couldn't issue checks for financial aid. I couldn't do financial aid business. I couldn't get my check either because it took down the payroll system. Okay, so those are considerations. So how can you avoid it? Education, training. Been talking about that a lot. Make sure you know how to recognize a phishing email. We have a lot of examples that are shared as part of our best practices. There's a lot of other sites that do it as well. DHS is big into giving you some examples on some of their support sites as well. Do your backups. Make sure the password protected properly. Some kind of authentication. Multi-factor authentication has been very successful in blocking a lot of phishing attacks and the results of the phishing attack more so than anything. Because if they don't have that second factor, they can't do anything. So multi-factor authentication, we're very heavy users in the department, multi-factor on everything that we can possibly put it onto. And there's things that we're looking at in the future to put it on more and more instances of capabilities. So multi-factor authentication is very successful. I talked to a group about 3 months ago, Missouri educators. Their number one project amongst 400 and some I talked to was to try to get multi-factor going, or they were working on it already because they recognized the importance of how it can stop a lot of attacks. Because if you don't have the second authentication, you can't go forward. And that multi-factor could be a token. It could be, in our case, a government-issued card that we use. So there's a lot of ways you can do multi-factor at the school level. Getting into the IT stuff, make sure you have firewalls, make sure they're up to date, make sure they're configured properly. A firewall is just a way to block traffic you don't want coming in. If you don't have it configured, it's going to come through. Okay, and I've seen a lot of firewalls that are wide open end to end, which means everything can come through. Why have a firewall then? So proper configuration is very important. Hopefully your IT department understands what you really use and can block what you don't use. Antivirus programs, very, very important. They are still successful programs. Use them heavily. Make sure they're up to date. Make sure their signature files are up to date. Endpoint detection and response software, getting a little more sophisticated than what you probably see at most places. But a lot of it nowadays is bundled. If you buy an antivirus program, a lot of times it comes as a package with an endpoint protection. Okay, even look at the operating systems you're using. There are some operating systems that have both a built-in personal firewall on that machine, and then they have some kind of antivirus protection. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't cost your school a dime. So look at those things if you don't have them. Talked about multi-factor authentication, very, very important. And then data loss prevention technologies. That capability alone could at least, if nothing else, alert you that something's happening that shouldn't be happening, that privacy data is going somewhere it shouldn't go. And data loss prevention can address financial, can address privacy, a number of different things as you configure it. But you really want something to alert you if something's happening that shouldn't happen. And more importantly, if you can, have that automatically block it so it can't happen. So again, that's another technology that your IT and your cyber teams should be looking at implementing that would help reduce breaches. Here was a data mishandling. Faculty member sent unencrypted email with hundreds of student privacy records to the wrong recipient outside the organization. Again, a data loss prevention program would have helped. We've implemented that for the department using Office 365, common software package that most of you have available or so a lot of schools are using. That's part of the package. It does some data loss prevention activities. Encrypt that sensitive information. So even if you don't have encryption end-to-end on your networks or encryption at rest for the privacy data, which is highly recommended, you can create a zip file that has that privacy information on there that's encrypted with a password. You can send the zip file of information to an intended recipient. Then you text them or call them and say, here's the password. Okay, so it's not together. And that's very secure. If that zipped file gets in the wrong hands, it's encrypted. If they don't have the password, they're not going to do anything with it. They can't do anything with it. Yes, technology is advancing. Yes, they could crack the password, but if it's a nice, strong password of sufficient length, it's going to take a long time, even at today's technology standards, in order to crack that password. So again, another basic practice to do. And training. You see that comes up a lot. Make sure it's the right training. Make sure it focuses on what people should do. The zip example is perfect in that, hey, anyone that's handling PII data or financial data that's sensitive, we kind of lump those two into what's called controlled unclassified information. That information needs to be protected. So, hey, the training is that information goes into a zip file. Here's how you do it. You need the documentation on how to do it. We've got that. It's part of what we provide as best practices. It walks you step by step on how to do it. So we're more than happy to share that with you. But again, the training is very important to make sure that they understand how to handle that data. I kind of talked about this a little bit, that account compromise with the bank accounts were changed, and I think this is the slide we're talking about here. Again, they gave out their password. They gave out the user account information. Come in and do anything you want with their user because it thinks it's you. If you have two-factor on it, without that factor, that second factor besides the password, they couldn't have done anything. They couldn't have gotten in because they don't have that factor. It could be a little token. It could be a key that's sent to your phone. It could be a soft certificate on your phone. It could be my phone beeping at me because I'm talking too long. Okay, so keep that in mind. There's lots of ways to prevent this, but that is definitely something we want to do. Multi-factor authentication, again, education. And monitoring. Again, your email security needs to be important. It needs to be actively monitored. You need to have staff that understand it. And if something gets compromised, lock that account. Make the student go back in there and recreate a new password so you're at least stopping anything else from happening. So it's very important to do account management for the students, or faculty in this case. Okay, this is a financial aid administrator. Clicked on a phishing email, gave them their password. Then they were able to access a OneDrive account that contained records, unencrypted records for 2,000 students. Same type of things. If you're going to store data, we highly recommend you encrypt the data wherever it is. We apply a principle of data encryption. Data at rest means it's sitting in storage somewhere. Data in transit, it's moving from one point to the other. And then data in use, if at all possible, with that application. The easiest one to do is data at rest. You encrypt the file or you encrypt the hard drive. Okay? And again, some of today's operating systems available to you have that for free, built into them, because it is so important. So encrypt that data. Again, education, multi-factor authentication, data loss prevention. You can see a trend here. Some of the same things are showing up as ways you can help get to the left of boom by implementing it, and we'll stop a lot of these. This one, laptop theft. Okay, I had an unencrypted laptop. Anybody could get onto it, didn't have a username and password. I got 1,000 student records in there, date of birth, social security number, grades, GPA, financial awards. They just took it. Okay. If you encrypted it on the laptop, data at rest, had access controls on the laptop, username and password at least, preferably some kind of two-factor, multi-factor, it's a laptop. It becomes a brick to them. They can't do anything with it because they can't get signed on. Because if you don't have the right password or the right access code, you won't go anywhere. Okay? Minimize. Again, minimize everything we can possibly do to prevent a breach. This kind of sums up a lot of what we've been talking about in a single picture. Do some kind of cybersecurity policy. If you don't have one, you should have one. You should also know who your lead is at your particular institution. Who's in charge of that program? Who do you go to when you have a potential breach? Because they should have a process on how you handle that that meets not only federal student aid requirements, Department of Education requirements, but also meets your state requirements. So again, a number of different things that have to respond when something happens. Policy procedures awareness, you may not be able to see the bullet as well, or the bulb there, it's multicolored. Physical perimeter, network host, those are protective ways. How do you protect the data? Layered protection. Because sometimes layers help you prevent folks from coming in. Do a risk-based approach to your security. Do you need to put everything together? In other words, everything the students are doing and everything your faculty is doing and everything you're doing all together, accessible anywhere, any way. Or do you want to take and divide it up, what we call segmentation? Divide it up into this is financial aid stuff. We're going to put some kind of additional protection around that. This is stuff that students can do, and I may not necessarily care what they do. Again, this is what faculty is going to do, which may be a combination of they're doing different things they want to do based on their research or et cetera. You may not want as much controls on it. However, if they're doing stuff that's privacy related, you may want more controls on it. So just a way to think about how you're going to protect that information. So that's a risk-based approach, segregation of your data, backups. You got to back that stuff up. Someone asked me at lunch, I was talking to somebody, actually one of our deputy coups, because he was asking me what the best way to do it, because he's looking at cloud solutions and so on. I personally take all my data and put it on a hard drive that I can take out. I also dump all that data onto a network storage device. That network storage device automatically backs up all that data to cloud storage. So I can lose the data in my house. I can lose the hard drive. They're all encrypted. I can lose the hard drive. My network storage device could go down. I still have the cloud backup. So again, think about your backup strategy, how it works best for your particular institution, and meets all your legal requirements from both federal and state perspectives. Multi-factor authentication, I think we beat that one pretty heavily. Again, there are lots of ways to do that that are relatively inexpensive when you're sending tokens or information off your phones. You can have certificates actually installed in here, which are, this says I'm Dan Commons, and if I use this right code, it tells the world I'm Dan Commons. But because I protected my phone, no one else can get to it. Handle your passwords. Keep an eye on privileged users. I don't think we've talked about that much, but basically look at your user population. You know, in your particular institutions, you may have a senior financial advisor that has access to everything, where you may only have access to a certain group of cases assigned to you. Okay, do you need access to all the cases? Probably not. So that's privilege. It's do the minimum that you should have access to, okay, at the right stages of your processes. So employ that with privileged users. Phishing and phishing and phishing and phishing. Continually hammer that. Training, raise your employee awareness. That's part of what you're doing right here is raising your awareness. Start thinking about these things. Take that culture back. Take that information back. Talk to your fellow employees. Training is part of that awareness program. Monitor third-party access to your data. Who are your business partners? Do they have access to your data? I know some schools have actually contracted out to third parties that are doing a lot of the financial aid business for them, but you got to ask yourself, how are they covering the cyber side of it? How are they providing that protection? Do they encrypt it? Do they have ways to prevent phishing in their environment so your data doesn't get corrupted or compromised? So talk about your third-party business partners. How are they protecting it, and how should they protect it? And then least privilege, I talked about that on the privileged users. Again, if I don't need access to it, I'll be honest, I don't want access to it. Therefore, I'm not accountable for it because it's not mine. I don't see it. I don't have to worry about it getting compromised. But if I need it as part of my job, that I need to have it, need to protect it. Okay, some of the compliance requirements. We talked a little bit earlier about how we're getting with the different groups, and we're starting those discussions to be able to understand and help them get involved in how we should craft, not necessarily craft, but what are some of their concerns that we might be able to address as we go forward. So the program participation agreement, that's what you sign, Student Internet Gateway, the SAG agreement's another one you sign, making you responsible for protecting that information. Okay, you are responsible by the agreements to protect it. Agreements aren't really prescriptive in how to protect it. I've been talking about a lot of how. It says you develop, implement, maintain, document, and data security, a program, and designate someone to coordinate that program. Those are the two big takeaways from that. But understand that program is very involved. You've got to have a lot of stakeholders. You've got to have the information covered, and you've got to implement and practice and test to make sure all that's working. So that program itself is very important. Then we have Gramm-Leach-Biley Act. We've all talked about it a lot. Then we have a couple of FSA Gen 1518 and 1612 as references. We have the FERPA requirements, which are coming. We're looking at those to make sure we're in full compliance. And then obviously whatever your state laws, policies, et cetera, require you to do are part of that big picture. So I worry about federal. You have some federal you have to worry about. You also have your state requirements. And in some states, those are very, very stringent requirements. So make sure that you're in compliance with them. And your program your InfoSec program should be able to cover all of that and make sure it's understood and trained. You're going to send us a report. We encourage you to report to us. Even if you're in doubt as to whether or not it's actually Title IV information, we're more than happy to get those reports and talk to you about them, work through them. I talked about the categorization earlier. Cat 0 is not Title IV data. For example, we had a library that got compromised. Someone took off of that library all of the accounts associated with the students, but it was a school-issued ID, and it was a student name, no impact to Title IV, no relationship to Title IV. We made that a Cat 0, and we made some recommendations to them on how they could prevent it in the future. More than happy to do that. Here's kind of the information in number 2 that we ask you for. Tell us when it happened, impact. If you know how it happened, make sure you have your POC so we can talk to them, and where you are in the process. And basically, you need to report it if you discover it, and we're going to work with you on this. This is a partnership. I think General Brown stressed that a lot this morning. This is a partnership. We want to be a partnership in cyber. Some of the resources, this particular site has some web-based training. Leverage it. Videos, webinars. The slides will be available, I believe, after the conference so that you can download them. Someone said a lot of the slides are already up on the conference website. So if they are, they should be there. If they aren't, they will be there shortly. Some of the stuff that we offer ourselves, our cybersecurity compliance page, that's being updated constantly. As IFAP evolves, this will evolve as well. The cybersecurity assessment tool, just a way that you can quickly go in and kind of get an idea of what your cyber hygiene is. So you do that yourself. No one sees the data but you. So it's an easy way to understand where you might be or might not be as far as a good cyber policy. I talked NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology. They're big in our world because we have to follow all of their policies. But these are some that will help you craft your local documents if you need some assistance. Obviously, we can help you walk through these. Some of them, I will tell you, are very, very technical. A few of the newer ones are written more for an individual that is not a cybersecurity expert. So those are helpful as well. But we're more than happy to help you through these. And lastly, if you got questions, want some answers, that's the email address to use. That goes to the team. The team reviews that mailbox every day, multiple times a day. They have it up as part of their normal business process. They will respond as quickly as possible to you. If it's a question, they need additional guidance, resources, et cetera, we'll discuss that among the cyber community within the department. There have been a few questions that we just didn't know what the answer was going to be, and we asked people outside that we know. Again, both Stephen Hernandez, the department assistant, and myself have contacts. We can go out and ask what-if questions. No disclosure of who asked the question, but to ask a what-if question, and we're happy to do that as well. So at this time, we're going to take a few minutes that we have left for questions and answers. I ask that you please come to the mic if you have a question. And nobody has questions. We got one question. The first one always starts the snowball effect.
So you mentioned you did cloud storage for your individual personal home. And
Yes, I do.
Also, would you recommend that for an institution? And how do you approach which organization? It seems very scary to me to send our info off. And then the other question, how do you keep passwords secure?
So for cloud storage, personally, I do that just for my own benefit. If I lose, house burns down or something, I won't lose my data. I can go to my cloud and pull it down. I can get to my cloud off of all of my devices as well. So that's personally how I do it. From an institution perspective, it's going to be up to how your IT infrastructure is set up, what your policies and processes are within your institution, on how you approach that, and it's so unique to each institution. I really couldn't give you advice. What we're doing is our primary data center within FSA, Next Generation Data Center, is a hard facility. We're in the process of migrating some of those capabilities to a cloud environment. We set up the secure baseline standard for the cloud. They're executing to that baseline standard. So we know what the underlying security is. A lot of cloud service providers give you that underlying security. Okay, they can actually provide that as a service to you. In our case, it's a combination of what the cloud provides and what we wanted on top of that to meet all of our requirements. So it's kind of a partnership with your cloud service provider. If you're looking at clouds, what can they offer to help you? And a lot of them have a lot of really good capabilities. And of course, I can't recommend any of those. And your second question was on passwords. There's lots of ways to do it. A lot of folks use password vaults, they call them, or those type of things. It's kind of something you need to do individually. I don't have a particular recommendation. I just know that my brain only holds so much information, so I'm hoping to get off of sites I don't have to go to anymore, but that never happens. So you just have to look at, the key is, it needs to be secure. If you pick a way, like one of the vaults that they offer, you look at any of your mobile app environments, they'll have 40 or 50 different apps that will do the work for you. Look very closely at the app. Make sure they're not doing things because they should have a privacy understanding, and just don't click through the terms and conditions. Make sure you read those because sometimes they will have access to that information. Okay, I don't typically use that. I use other methods. I don't use my cell phone for that because I don't want people to look at my information. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry. You were first?
You were talking about endpoint protection and antivirus and also backup. I was just wondering, because you guys have seen a lot of it, are there any particular pieces of software that you've seen that work better than the rest for those two things?
I can't recommend software just because I can't as a federal employee. I do know that if you look at your operating systems and what your operating system companies can provide you, they've gotten a lot better. I won't particularly say, recommend any particular one. We in the department use Microsoft as our baseline. And I know the Microsoft capabilities have gotten better year after year, but so have a lot of other companies. So you kind of have to look at what your IT infrastructure is, what your baseline is. If you're a big Microsoft shop, you probably want something Microsoft supported, either what they offer or something that supports a Microsoft environment. If you're big into Linux or mainframes, then you would be looking at different technologies.
Okay. And what about for backup? Anything?
Backup, again, there's a lot of good products out there. I personally have a product on my machine that does my NAS backup to the cloud. Every time something shows up, it's backing up constantly. Again, you have to look at your particular environment, what you can support from your IT perspective. Because backups, a lot of times if you're putting in new software or software you've not had before, it's going to take some expertise to get it up and going properly. Yep. And then you have to manage it. And that's another piece of expertise you need on your staff.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
My understanding for for our A133 audits coming for the next year is there's going to be a new component that the reviewers will be looking at in our compliance as far as cybersecurity and that kind of thing. Do you have additional information on how we can be prepared for that or what the minimum type things they would be looking at would be?
Specifically, you probably want to see the compliance group that's here. They also have a session. They're going to talk about that a little bit more. I have an understanding. We're kind of working out what we think is a good approach. I don't have a solid answer. The compliance team would be able to give you a better answer from the legal compliance requirements. They have that over there. I try to support them. They ask me things. We're trying to understand how we are restructuring to be able to support that better in the future. And that's all part of these ongoing discussions that we're having with the different organizations to understand what the stakeholders are expecting out of us. And I think some clarity needs to go around it as we implement new cyber capabilities or requirements. But they have a session. The compliance team has a session. So that's probably the best place to talk to them about. I believe there's also an OIG audit session happening as well. That might give you some additional information. Yes, sir.
I suppose this might be a bit of a doomsday scenario, but has there been any things like, say the Experian data gets stolen and then they use that to go and steal data from, students' accounts or from schools? And if so, where does the legal responsibility lie? I mean, would there be any recourse for the school if we can show that it's a result of somebody else's data breach and not ours specifically?
I really couldn't answer that question. That would be a legal question. I just don't have an answer for that one, unfortunately.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't had that question before, but that's more of a legal. I think you'd have to get your lawyers involved to see exactly what your agreement was or what the expectations of the individuals were with their credit service organization. Obviously, there's a lot of lawsuits and stuff going on as well, so it's a legal question.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you. Sir, while you're up there.
Dan, first, thanks for the presentation. A lot of awareness items that I think help everyone. I did have a question on one of the slides you showed. It had that X amount of data was available on the dark web. You talked about cybersecurity experts. Do you have staff that are focused on just searching the dark web to identify if there are things that are compromises that have happened, and do you recommend that that's a role that organizations have in place?
So we, over this last year, put together what we call the Hunt Team. It is a FSA department combined operation. We have basically brought in the experts we need. Again, original focus was us. This summer, I expanded the team to cover the schools from a non-intrusive manner. We're going to look at more and more things we can do with the schools as well. But some of the same processes we're applying to the school we developed this summer, we're now turning around to the third parties. And we're looking also at our third parties, our business partners directly. In some cases, those organizations that actually host our data, we're looking at them as well using that same concept. And yes, hunt teams are very difficult. They're very expensive. There is a unique set of requirements. I don't personally believe that the education environment has the dollars to be able to afford teams like that. That's one of the reasons why we're looking into what we could start providing to them, because it's going to be a normal part of business for us. I just add additional IP addresses, school addresses, or school website to a process we're already building. A little more resource for me, not a lot more, compared to what the schools would have to stand up. 6,500 plus or minus schools would have to stand up.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Hi, Dan. Thanks. I want to thank you first for giving all the information you've given today. It's definitely been informative. Has the Department of Ed looked at other industries which have mitigated cybersecurity issues by enlisting the help of white hackers via bug bounties and so forth?
We have not specifically looked at bug bounties, but the model that we're using for the Hunt Team incorporates a lot of those things that you would see industry doing, because we went to industry and talked to them a lot. We've had a lot of vendors come in and talk to us about how they built Hunt Team. We're also dealing with like MITRE Corporation, which has done a lot of research in this space, Homeland Security. So we went to a lot of sources before we even stood the team up, and we're modeling the team and evolving as we go forward, but bug bounties hasn't been part of our vernacular at this point.
Would you recommend universities take part in some kind of bug bounties to help with that, or?
If I was the head of a school IT department, CIO, or whatever the equivalent would be at a particular institution, at this stage of the game, I'd make sure my basic 101s were done first. And I think that is where we see the school stumbling. Like, do I have phishing protection? Okay, do I have multi-factor authentication? Do I have data loss? I think I'd look at those internal things that are within my control before I created a hunt team or before I went out for bug bounties, et cetera. Because if I get that done, that's going to stop a lot of that attack vector. If I do it, monitor it, maintain it. So to me as an IT, if I was in a position like that, I'd say, I need my money down here. Let's do the basics, be consistent on the basics, get my standards, operate for that for a while, and then mature my program over time.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Now that I'm officially scared from all this clarification, for example, reporting a breach of a stolen laptop that happened months ago, we should still report it and give all the information to the department?
We take it in because, one, it helps me understand what's happening in the schools. Okay, even if it is, for example, it's a totally encrypted laptop, oh, good, you got encryption. I can use you as an example. Not your name of your school, but hey, this school had a laptop stolen. It was encrypted. We're not worried about it.
Okay.
I mean, we're worried about loss of the device and those kind of things. But the data on it was protected, and for them to get into it, it's going to take a huge amount of work that's not going to happen this year. Next year, probably 10 years or more, depending on how good their encryption was and their passwords that configured it. So we like to get that information. It's typically going to be in the category 0. And we just keep that for metrics, understanding, help us know what's happening, because your one lost laptop could be 15 that was taken from somewhere else, you know. So if we can think about, hey, did you do these things, best practices, et cetera. So there's no harm in reporting to us. If it's something that simple, we're going to say, hey, thank you. We'll probably talk to your IT director and say, hey, did you do these things? Did you encrypt it? You know, maybe we want to know what tools you're using. Are they current tools we see that are, you know, somewhere in the market space that are doing the right things? Because we've seen open source tools being used by schools that just aren't really doing what you think they are. And so we look at tools from time to time. We have a whole group within the technology office where I'm at that looks at tools periodically. So that's going to be the approach. No harm in reporting to us. We're going to talk to you. Talk to your POC, that's why the POC is so important, and then be able to give feedback to you, close that loop. Thank you very much for reporting it. Here's some best practices you might want to implement. Obviously, some training would be good. How do you secure it? We've had people at conferences, laptops stolen out of their rooms. Same type of thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
And what you didn't say is you've got 24 hours to report the data breach or you're subject to a $50,000 fine. But being on a different note, you mentioned that you'd looked at 6,500 websites, and I think you said
650,000.
650,000. Okay, well, that's a lot more than we have Title IV
Yes.
schools. So
No, if you realize that each school has more than one website.
Okay, but you said that like 88% had problems, and if they did
No,
five things, they would be eliminated.
If they do the
or
5 things, we could eliminate 88% of the problems we found.
Okay, when are you going to tell us what 5 things those are to do?
So that was our first run through in August. We're refining that because we found some false positives. So that was our first attempt. We've refined it in the last 2 months. We're getting ready, and I should be seeing the report soon. 1st of December, we kicked off another end-to-end look at the schools. But again, the 650,000 was typically a school has a whole bunch of websites that are exposed to the internet. Okay, so for that 6,500 schools, you figure some of these large universities may have 400 or 500 websites exposed just themselves. I've seen smaller places that have a couple of them and didn't even realize they had one of them up and going, for example. So we're trying to do a big sweep to find out what's really there, to validate it's really, in fact, your websites before we release the information back to school. So we did that initial. We're doing some proofing, data vetting, et cetera. This month we'll do another one. We'll compare it to our results, and then we'll start communicating that out to the schools. And we're still talking about how we can legally get that information out to the schools.
Well, if there's 5 things to do that would eliminate so many problems, can't you just give us like a best practice?
And that's
thing?
what we want to do first is, hey, everybody, if you got these 5 problems, we recommend you take a look at them. But I'd also like to be able to give to your IT director, these are the things we found at your school, open source research. Didn't touch your school, but everybody in the world knows this. So you hopefully will fix these problems.
Thank you.
All right, I got the 5-minute sign, so it doesn't look like we have any more questions. Thank you very much. There's a session after, oh, hang on, I got one more question. There is a session, number 26, which is coming up here very shortly, which will be a panel with myself, our Office Inspector General, and the department's security operations, cyber operations chief as well.
I was just want to ask, I know training's really important, but I just did my training for state authorized thing. I don't want to name the state, but I mean basically all I had to do was certify by email that I'd read a document. Now I did read the document, but I mean I'm sure a lot of people just go, tick, done. You know, really, I read it last year, what's changed? Nothing. Any ideas for how we could make that, more interesting, better, or to enforce the fact that somehow, you have done the training?
Enforcement is actually up to you guys, unfortunately, but I will tell you from the department perspective, we change our training every year. We improve it, we add examples, new attacks we've seen. So we work very hard to make sure that our training is up to date. And in our case, it's tracked through our learning management system. So we know exactly who's taking it and not taking it. And then those that don't take it, our department CIO has a little love letter for them very quickly. All right, thank you very much, folks.